So today we have a special guest.
And when we were doing the project, this client was young. The budget was very limited.
It's doable.
It wasn't doable
It was
even at
already
that time.
very limited.
But as a young architect, you said, well, let's try, right? I mean, we tried.
We have Joseph. He is the founder and principal of BHATCH Architects, and we're going to talk to him and ask him everything about landed residential design. Let's go. So Joseph, thanks for coming to our NOTG chat interview.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I saw from your profile, your career, currently you are the founder, principal of BHATCH Architects.
That's right.
From 2009 until 2024. Were you working for an architect firm before that, after you graduated from Master of Architecture?
After I graduated, I worked in a local office, K2LD Architects, and I was there for 6.5 years with the same portfolio of residential houses during that time before I decided to start out on my own.
Why study architectural? I mean, you graduated Master of Architecture at NUS. Has this been a passion since young, or was it a discovery after you graduated from your JC or?
Well, architecture wasn't my first choice, to be honest.
What was your first choice?
I wanted to do law.
Okay.
But the requirements for doing law was very stringent back then. So I think when I was applying to go into NUS, it was my sister who told me that I think you should consider architecture and I think it suits you. And so I decided to give it a try. Didn't do very well in the first 2 years of architecture, but I think it's something that gradually it became, I became more aware of what architecture was about. And then from then, I think it became something that I was comfortable with, and I was happy to practice and do architecture even after graduation and for the last 20 years.
Right. So that 6.5 years, as a new architect, what were some of the challenges as a young architect back then? And that was in the early 2000 eras.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the early 2000 eras was good because it was a boom time. There were lots of residential houses. People were interested in modern architecture, right? Before then, I think a lot of the houses were pitch roofs. They were Balinese style, very different, kind of aesthetic sense. When I graduated, there was more clients who were interested in modern architecture that is not so much Balinese, but what we see in Europe and in America. As a fresh architect, I think there was a big difference, obviously, between studies, academic, and profession. And I think the biggest jump was that everything that you learn in architecture school, they are no longer relevant. And the actual practice of architecture has a lot to do with how to run a project, how to manage a project, contractual issues, authority issues. Design was maybe about 20% of that work that we do as graduates. This is very different from school. School, obviously, 100% of the attention was on design.
Right. And then you realize that once you come out, there's you need to wear many hats. Project manager, coordinator, builder, BCA and all that.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. So we were chatting earlier just now before we start the interview that now at BHATCH Architects, there are 4 of you, and 90% of your portfolio belongs to landed residential. Was that because of your training at the first 6.5 years? Were you dealing a lot more with landed properties? In K2LD Architects, all the projects were residential as well. So that was the kind of backbone of my education. And I think when I left the office, I also make a decision that I want to continue to do residential architecture. What was different was that in K2LD, we were doing a lot of good class bungalows. Sentosa was just starting to develop. And so we had a lot of very high-end projects in K2LD. I wanted to start my own practice and not just do big houses, but I had an interest in doing small houses smaller projects which would be equally challenging, especially from a financial budget point of view. But I felt that it gives me a slightly different outlook on what design can do to come out with an end product. That, good architecture doesn't really need to be expensive. That with a limited kind of budget and being creative, being innovative, we can still come up with a good space, a beautiful house, and something that people will be happy to live in.
So you're talking about the satisfaction of like working within a constraint. Like if a client for interterrace give a limited range because of their budget wise, you feel that it's actually quite challenging and exciting as well to do something.
I think also because of maybe this generation, during my generation, where the talk of sustainability started to appear. And I thought that, one of the main thing about being sustainable is to be able to do more with less resources. And so to be able to do a beautiful house with a much lower budget would be sustainable in itself. And that's something that I think it was meaningful to at least test out when I started the practice.
Right. So, moving forward from 2009 until today, it's been how many years? 15 years or 15 years already?
Yes, that's right.
Right. In terms of a landed residential portfolio, would you still say that it is in a range like interterraces, corner, semi, all the way to good class bungalow? Do you still deal with that range, or you all have like further diversified or?
We still generally focus on residential houses. Again, because of my background, we do a mix of small houses, interterrace, semi-detached, and coupled with slightly larger bungalows and even some good class bungalows. So, but I think it's always something that I felt that if somebody comes to me and I'm busy with doing all these bungalows, and somebody comes to me and say, will you be able to do this small interterrace house for this limited budget? I'll find hard to say no, because that's again part of the belief that I have that, I want to continue to work on those projects and they can coexist in our office together with the larger projects.
Right. I think that also resonates with the name of a firm, right? Just as you were saying that, I was asking Joseph what is the meaning of BHATCH. So he was saying that it's like a command in a coding world that is to work within boundaries and be creative within the boundary, right? And maybe bring us through like some of the design trends. Yeah, let's talk about design trends. Like when you graduated and you came out to start your firm in 2009, you mentioned there was a shift away from pitch roof, away from Balinese style. Was that the commencement of like the glass house era? And then how has that shifted 15 years till today?
I think, yes, there was, I think during that period, there was a shift from looking at architecture that is available regionally. Again, that's where the Balinese style pitch roof kind of references comes from, to a kind of global outlook of how architecture is. And that's what was, the modernist houses in America and Europe. So yes, a lot of flat roofs, a lot of houses with large glass panels and so on. I kind of think that over the last 15, 20 years, we, at least in Singapore, there is a better kind of identity that we can now say that, well, this seems to be Singaporean kind of architecture, which is that taking off that modernist kind of house together with how do we live in a tropical environment. So we get a lot more overhangs, pitch, instead of just a flat roof, we now have a large overhanging roofs to kind of protect the glass. We also start having a lot of screens, timber screens or metal screens to protect the inner environment. And also, I think in the last 8 years to 10 years, there's also that shift to sustainable and green movement, which is why we see a lot more landscaping on our roofs and around the house. So I think there's a good kind of shift from what we were doing 15 years ago to now. And again, it has to do with understanding where the environment we are in and the challenges that we face with the kind of global warming, with the kind of issues about urbanization, and we don't no longer see greenery around us, that this landscaping, these gestures of introducing green into architecture becomes more prevalent now than say in the last 10 years.
Right. Were during this journey, like especially in the last 5 to 8 years, do you see people going back to the previous style? Like do clients like out of curiosity ask you like, should I do a pitch roof? Should I go back to Balinese style? Or it's like almost non-existent?
I think there will always be some clients who's happy to go to do house that is to do a Balinese style house. In the same way, there are always some clients who ask, can I do a classical style house, Roman style classical house with, Roman classical columns. But I think that's a lot less now than before. People are a lot more well-traveled. Singaporeans are going to different places, different countries, and they come back and they get influenced by what is happening overseas. So I would say 90% or more, maybe 95% of clients are happy to say, we want
a
modern version of what the house could be.
Right.
And maybe just a very small group of people would say, I want a Balinese style or I want a classical house now.
Right. So in our firm, I mean, we started PLB about 6 to 7 years back, and then our shift towards the landed market started in about 2020 after COVID. And now we have a core group that is handling the sale of landed properties and also like investment in landed homes. We use a various form of metrics like for example, we've came up with this framework called Category 1 to 4 to identify the types of homes in the state and condition that they are in. So, for example, Cat 1 homes, our lingo to our clients, we have been already using this framework for about 4 years. Cat 1 homes refer to homes that need a total rebuild. Cat 2 are homes that are 20, 25 years old. They need A and A because of a lack of bedrooms and build-up area. Then Cat 3 homes are homes that was constructed in the last 10, 15 years. And then Cat 4 are brand new from developers. So this is a framework to identify pricing as well as the condition of the home. And we always have this internal kind of like checklist as well. Like a lot of buyers on the ground will ask us, what are the must-have when they want to rebuild a home? Like example, they will ask, Melvin, how many bedrooms minimally should I have?
Right.
So that when I want to exit 3, 5, 8 years later, I have an ease of exit. Like there's an audience that will like this configuration. So for example, number of bedrooms, a lift is a must-have. Should I install solar panel? Should I make sure that the power outage is suitable to install EV charger? Like, what are some of these things that you're seeing on the ground now that you think can help a buyer when reconstructing, rebuilding to have an ease of exit? Like, what are the must-have in your list?
Some of the must-have would be the, things that has a planning for the future. So EV chargers are common. We typically have EV chargers for at least 2 cars in a house, in a small house. Solar panels are also increasingly a must, right? 95% of our projects have solar panels. So that's something that, again, with a projection that electricity is going to be a lot more expensive in the future, that people install that. As for besides that, whether there's a must for a certain number of rooms and all that, I think that's less fixed in place because nobody knows. There are always someone who may want to have a house with just 2 bedrooms, just for them and their kids. But I would think that over the last 10 years as well, houses have gone taller. So a lift is possibly something that most homeowners will install as well. One of the shifts in the last 5 to 8 years was that with the envelope control, homeowners are starting to build more vertically. So 10 years ago, we typically do houses which are 3 stories. Maybe if you have a basement, but a basement was also uncommon then. But I think now, there are a lot of houses which are 3. We have houses which are 4 stories, and we also have houses which are 5 stories, inclusive of the basement. That partly comes from the increased cost of construction and land. So most people want to build up as much as they can. Because of that, lift becomes something that is quite common. And with larger houses, you expect more families to kind of gather together, or bigger families. So it's also, I think, a trend for most houses to try to include a family room, entertainment room, or things like that, which is slightly different from the idea of a living room. Right? In this case, it's more of an entertainment room with TV, sound system, karaoke, or even a pool table, for instance.
Right.
So I think those are possibly the kind of trends that we see in the last 8 years or so.
Right. And what you're mentioning about building taller is the inclusive of leveraging on the envelope control to build a M level. Right. It's like 1M. You're referring to that approach, right? I think about 2-3 years back, I saw a house which was under the Luxus Hill series by Bukit Sembawang. They launched a batch with 2 living rooms. It's like it's suitable for multi-gen. It's like your parents can have their own living, dining, kitchen on one level. You have your own living, dining, and kitchen on one level. Do you see that a lot in the market?
I think it's becoming increasingly more popular. Again, I think for private residential houses, whether that happens, it really depends on, the family or the homeowner planning for something that is going to happen in 10, 15 years time. And for private houses, at least, most parents would say, I don't know whether my kid will stay with me, in 10 years time, right? But they would possibly kind of maybe plan such that spaces are more flexible for this to happen, but not so much that, the children will definitely come and stay and use and have their own separate living room. But I think it's possible in terms of the planning to take into consideration that if this happens, right, can we just knock off something, or can we just adjust something so that the family or the extended family can then be here with us?
Right. Let's talk a little bit about costing. Yeah, I think our audiences will sort of like favor that a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, to understand about cost on the ground. Like costing has escalated since COVID. I heard from some builders and architects that it has sort of stabilized recently. Maybe talk a little bit about like in the last 2 years, what is the minimum amount if somebody wants to do up like 1,006+ square feet inter-terrace? Let's start from the low range first.
Sure.
Yeah, like what is still possible if somebody wants to tear down, rebuild to the max build up?
Averagely, for inter-terrace to tear down and rebuild, you are looking at about 400 to 450 per square foot for construction cost. This is what we call average kind of finishes with the typical requirements for, say, lift and maybe ensuite for most of the bedrooms, but not including basements. Right? Basements tends to be about 50% or more than that. So if you're looking at basement, then you are looking at maybe 450 to 500 per square foot.
Sometimes when buyers go on the ground, if they see maybe a landed, depending on whether is it in a 3-story mixed landed zone or 2-story mixed landed zone, they usually want to ask like, what is the maximum I can build in terms of build out area? Is there like a tip for home buyers when they go on the ground? Like to have a mental calculation, although sometimes it really depends like on different parameters as well. Like usually how would one retail buyer see build up area?
The total build up of the house.
Yeah. Let's say if it's a 1,615 square feet inter-terrace.
Usually if it's a 2-story house, I think you can calculate it with the setback involved, because it used to be such that you can use a plot ratio for calculation. So in the past, we could say 1.4 is the plot ratio and that's the maximum you can build. It's a lot more tricky with envelope control because, as you said, you can play around. And I've seen developments where it's a 2-story landed, but there are 4 stories inside.
So you can play around with the 12 meters envelope control. 15.5.
Yes, that's right.
Right. What is the largest that you have seen, like in terms of build up inside? Yeah.
I think for inter-terrace house, the largest that we have seen would be, we have done something which is close to about 5,000. But again, that is a 3-story landed
15.5 meters.
15.5.
Right. That's about 5,000.
Yes.
How
And
many-
that's already a huge house. I mean, it used to be the case that small bungalow is about 4,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, 5 to 6,000 is considered a huge house actually.
Right. And how many bedrooms were there?
I think we've managed to fit about five bedrooms and maybe a study. So
Right.
6 if you really want to fit everything.
So, based on the projects you have seen and done, is it good to assume that usually if somebody buys a landed in a 2-story zone, because of the 12 meters limitation, they tend to want to build the M level. Plus, they might consider a basement compared to something in 15.5 meters at Miller Control.
I think it's getting more common now. I think basement, if they can afford it, is something that people go for. Again, the use for the basement typically would be the entertainment room as well as most of the service spaces, which is the helper's room, the bomb shelter, laundry room, as well as the yard spaces.
Right.
So you have the basement and you have the 3.5 stories above.
Right. And based on $400 to $450, that means you're saying that it will be in the range of, if it's 4,000 square feet, then it'll be about 1.6, 1.7, which is still doable.
Which is still doable, but that would not be with a basement though.
Right.
With a basement, you probably have to use about 500. So basement cost per square foot will be about 600, will be about 50% more. So averagely, I would say then you're looking at $500 per square foot if you have a basement included.
Right. In total.
In total.
So when you started in the past, maybe 10, 15 years ago, what was the cost of rebuilding? Was it like $200, $150? It's like...
When I first started, in my previous office, I think we started at about $300 per square foot. It was possible to do it lower, but the average for a kind of mid-average finishes would cost you about $300 per square foot.
And what do you ascertain this increase in the rebuild costs? Which portion takes up the largest? Is it labor or is it really the materials and stuff?
I think a bit of everything. Actually, the cost of substructural works, your foundations, your piling has gone up because of the cost of concrete and materials. Labor has gone up, partly because of things like increased cost for dormitories. Since COVID, you no longer can keep all the workers. There's a limitation to the number of workers per room, for instance. And so cost of labor has gone up, and also insurances for contractors and workers has also gone up. So that's that cost of construction. Materials has gone up. And I think also with COVID, interestingly also, people are spending more on the interiors of the house now than say 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, out of that cost of construction, maybe for semi-detached, I may spend about 60, 70,000 for interior finishes, or maybe 100,000 if we want to do more. But gradually I think people are of the opinion that if they have to stay at home, they need a home office in case another pandemic breaks out. Even if there's no pandemic, they want a comfortable interior space, a lot more than say 5 years ago. And so we have been spending a lot more on interior design. And so it's not uncommon to do interior design, the carpentry and fit out for a house, and spend for semi-D about 400,000, 500,000. We have also done it for 600,000-700,000.
That's in addition to the cost of construction.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So it basically essentially brings the average cost of construction up
to about $450, $500.
Yes, that's right.
What are some of the other very recent needs from clients that have engaged you to rebuild and stuff? Are there any wish lists that they usually have other than the lift, the solar panels and stuff like that?
Thankfully, the needs are still more or less the same.
Okay.
Like I said, people do go for better kind of finishes for the interiors these days. We have a lot more choices than say 10 years ago. These days, we have what they call splintered stone. You have quartz and different materials that you can use inside the house. If anything, the needs of the users are the same, but with the for instance, the change or the progressive nature of materials. For instance, it has changed such that we maybe don't use so much marble or natural materials. A lot of them are synthetic. And synthetic materials are not cheaper than, say, the natural materials, interestingly, because they are materials that look like the real thing, but they have a lot less maintenance. And again, that's something that I think people have gradually shifted to, and that informs again the finishes for the interior of and the exterior of the house. People want a house that is that looks good but less maintenance, and also that it will still look good, say, in 10 years or 15 years time.
Right. And maybe let's talk a little bit about like the process of this, like rebuilding and all that. And let's move one step backwards. Is like usually how does the architectural firm business model work? Like is it that usually some firms, maybe they are just involved in the designing, and then they launch a tender to get builder, or certain firms like it's a one-stop solution from start to finish. They project manage as well. And how does BHATCH Architects work?
There probably will be slight variations between different offices. So I can only speak for myself, my office. So what we do is that once we are appointed, we do start the design process with the clients. And for us, because it's a residential house, a lot of how we start the design involves talking to the client, understanding who they are, how they live, their lifestyle, what their needs are. I usually will ask the question of, the house for in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, who is going to be living there, and who are we really planning for? And that design process, from planning to the architectural design of the house, would involve understanding and discussing about materials. For instance, what kind of materials are they looking for? Do they have a certain requirement of how well a material performs, for instance? Whether there are specific requirements for certain longevity of the material or insulation, and etc. and so on. With the design process, once the design is firmed up, we can then submit to the different agencies for approval. And once we have the approvals from the different agencies, we can then prepare the drawings for the tender process, where we invite maybe 5-6 different builders to tender for a job. So that entire process is what we call the design stage or the pre-construction stage. It usually would take about 6 months at least for semi-D or inter-terrace house. For bungalows, it may take longer than that, 8-9 months. Again, it depends on how fast decisions are made. We have gone through a design process where it takes a year, for instance. But having more time in the design process is something that we appreciate, because having more time means that we can be more thoughtful about the requirements, about how they actually feel about their house, who they are planning it for, what kind of materials. You can go through every little tiny details that way, from the macro part to the micro. And we are happy to take a longer time, because what it means is that then during the construction part, there will be less changes, which means less variations and less headaches for the owners as well as for the builders. Once you've gone through the design process, you award it to a builder. Then it's the actual construction stage, which takes 12 months for, say, a small house, an inter-terrace house, to maybe 22 to 24 months for a bungalow. And even after that, we have what we call 12 months of defects liability period. So after the client has moved in, about 12 months, the builder has to still go back to rectify any defects that exists in the house during the construction and all that. So only after that 12 months and all defects are fully resolved, then the process is kind of closed. And we say that the builder's work is done, and then we can pay the builder in full. unfortunately for an architect, our liability continues to stretch on. And I have clients who would still text me after 10 years to ask me, I have this issue, what can I do about it? And we continue to advise the client, right? Kind of informally on what are the things to, solve their issues with their house.
Right. For the tender process, usually like what are the parameters? Would you launch a tender setting like a max range or like a reserve range, or how does it work?
Because of the design process that we've gone through with the client, so we say that set of drawings and specifications that we have, that will be everything that the client would like to have. It's kind of the dream list or the dream house that the client has. So with the tender process, it's we select 5 builders, typically 5 to 6 builders, and we say that we will select maybe a few builders who are very good builders, right? Which means maybe builders who have done works which have won awards, maybe, or maybe builders who have done good class bungalows. So these are what we call the A-grade builders. We will select some which are the B-grade builders, which is not as good in terms of the workmanship. Maybe the company is not established. Maybe they don't have such a good track record, but they are still decent builder that can deliver and that, would have no issue building the house smoothly. And maybe we have a dark horse, which is a builder that we have not worked with before. We try to select builders that we know that will be able to do the work well and competently. With that process, when the prices come back, the prices will always be, again, an indication of everything that the client wishes to have. And so from there, there's always the exercise of trying to engineer it in terms of the pricing with the builder and the client. If the pricing needs to be adjusted, are we happy to take out some stuff, some fluff that is good to have but we don't really need it now? Or do we simplify some of the material specifications that would still perform in the same way, but maybe cheaper because the material is, say, from another region, or maybe because the sizes of the material are more limited, so it's a cheaper kind of material to use. So we go through the exercise to engineer it down to the cost that the client is happy to pay, and then that would be great. Then you can shake hand on it, and the process will be finalized and awarded.
So you usually work with a panel of builders that you constantly like bring in and out and monitor from there. Like, have you heard any horror stories before? Like builders went bust, or like halfway you had to find another builder to take over, or like are there stories in the market? Because these are usually sort of questions buyer will ask us. Like, what happens if my builder went bust, and like what's going to happen to my project? Will people even take over?
It has happened before. Thankfully, it has not happened in my practice, but I think it probably would have been more common, say 20 years ago. The construction industry was not as well regulated, in the sense that there were a lot more of these older builders coming on board, and they have no cash flow or no cash reserve to take on the project 20 years ago. But I think it's much better now. Horror stories of builders running away or not completing a project, it's really much lower now. Again, I think it comes from the short list of builders that you invite for tender. Obviously, you want to invite builders who has been around for at least, hopefully, a good 8 years to 10 years, that they have completed X number of projects that is well done. And then we will always also take a look at the projects together with the client to see completed projects that the builders have done. All that said, though, that doesn't, I suppose, prevent that inevitable if you get a dud that a builder can't deliver. If your architect executes the contract based on the contract from the Singapore Institute of Architects, there are clauses or devices that protects the client in the event that a contractor goes bust. So the most common thing is that in the SIA contract from Singapore Institute of Architects, we have this thing called liquidated damages. For every day that the builder is delayed, the builder would have to be penalized and pay the client a certain sum of money on a daily rate. So that is the onus to prevent builders from delaying willfully. The second thing that the SIA contract has is this thing called a retention sum. When the builder is on board, they bill you, they invoice you on a monthly basis. If they claim X amount per month, 10% of the value is actually retained and not paid. It's what we call retention sum. And that value is retained all the way until they complete the project. And when they complete the project, half of that retention sum is released. The remaining half of the retention sum is only released after the 12 months of defects. These two devices are there in place to protect homeowners. So I think because of this, because of the kind of improvement in the building industry, as well as being able to do the background checks of the builders, you don't get a lot of cases of these builders running away or not completing their work, thankfully.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. I think that helped a lot with especially like first time landed buyers that wants to go into the work of rebuilding. But sometimes there can be a bit of anxiousness about this portion, especially if they do not know good architects or builders. Usually what is the payment schedule? Like you mentioned that builders bill the client monthly. What is the schedule like in terms of percentage?
There's no percentage for the construction billing these days. So it's based on the amount of work that is done that month. So if I've only done 10 walls this month, I can only invoice you for that 10 walls, and you only need to pay me for that. Every month is based on what we call the progress that is done on site. Again, this eliminates overpayment, which means that in the past, without such a mechanism, builders can overclaim. And also in the past, builders would say, I want a deposit or down payment. The SIA contract doesn't allow for this. So what it means is that you don't have overclaim, you don't have down payment. So chances of a builder taking money and running away is very low, eliminated.
So it's like even the down payment and deposit is removed from, it's like you start from scratch.
Yes.
Right. And especially for buyers taking construction loan, whenever a builder invoices, does the architect need to sign off to verify, and then like the bank will release the payment?
Yes. I think all the banks will require the architect's certificate, what we call interim certificate, which is certificate that we sign off with the value to be paid to the builder. They will require on a monthly basis. They require that before they disburse the monies to the builders.
That means when you receive the invoice, you pass to your client, you have to go down and check as well.
Yes, but we typically would check together with the help of a quantity surveyor. So the two professionals are the ones that evaluate the work that is completed for that month, and we then recommend the amount that is to be paid to the builder.
Right. So based on what I heard is that your current business model for BHATCH is that you do end-to-end, I mean from start to finish. Right. And like, do you still personally handle clients yourself, or like it's largely you're doing advisory, or like are you because like as businesses evolve, sometimes the main founder will be doing more strategy work. Yeah. Like what is your current setup like?
I am involved throughout the entire stage of the project. One of the reasons why I enjoy doing architecture is really, drawing and making models and going through a design process with the clients. I mean, if I were asked to sit back, I think I'll be really miserable. So yeah, So all the projects, I'm actually every project I'm involved in the design part of the work. Once it goes to the construction, then typically I'll have an assistant together with myself, and we will still be involved throughout the stages of the construction until the end of the project.
Right. Then how about your other architects? Like what are they usually in charge of?
They assist me. I mean, there's a lot of other administrative, contractual, as well as authority work that is involved in construction. So the architects helps to fill in the blank. I mean, without them, I wouldn't be able to do any of the work that I've done.
Right. So recently, one of our consultants, George, did like a banter home tour together with you.
Right.
For one of the projects that you have completed for our client that we are currently marketing the home with. Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that home. Like, what was some of the inspiration that you and the client actually conceptualized together, and how was the process like?
I think the good part about the work is that the client had a lot of faith in our work. Most of the time when we suggested, why don't we try this, or why don't we try that for this project, the client, they were always willing to listen. I think at the end of the project, when it's finished, maybe the project retained maybe 90% of the original design that we had in mind. As for how that project was, how the design started off and all that, again, there was that discussion with the clients on lifestyle or, preferences for even what kind of materials they would like, what kind of look, what kind of atmosphere they would like for the house on the interior and the exterior. We've gone through different things, testing out different things and all that. So eventually, I think, it came out close to what we had started with. A lot of the house, both on the external and the interior, we used a lot of these fair face bricks on the outside and the inside. Initially, the client was skeptical about it, particularly because he says that a lot of houses in the 80s had these red bricks, and he didn't really want the house to look like, 80s house, and looking aged and out of time. But we said, let's start looking at the bricks as the base material for the house. But there are so many different choices and varieties of these bricks these days. And even the sizing of bricks in the modern bricks are very different from what we used to do, say, 15 years ago, because of technology, because of the material they use. So we went through maybe a selection of maybe 8 to 10 different types of bricks, colors, and all that before we said, well, this is something that you're comfortable with and that we think that will look good. And then we said, then great, then we'll go with it. And that's how the entire process went through a lot of that discussion about from the suggestions that we have, and the client, in this case, mostly agreed with what we wanted to do.
Right. Why was there like a discussion about the bricks? Was it like this oncoming trend that you recommended, and like prior to the suggestion of using this material, what was the original idea that the client wanted?
I don't think the client had the idea of how they see the house on the outside. They had a mental image of bricks being old and moldy, right? As for why, I think we wanted to look at bricks because it has kind of evolved in terms of the technology of how the material is made. That's something that we felt that let's look at it in a fresh way now. And there are these new ways of, and even the sizing of the bricks and all that, they are different. We wanted to use bricks also because it has a certain quality of warmth in it that you find hard to replicate with most other materials. With concrete, with granite, they are always a little bit cold. With bricks, there's a warmth to it, especially when the sun or the lighting shines on it, that you can actually feel that glow. And when you touch the brick, again, it's a slightly different feel from a stone. So that's one of the reasons why we started that discussion on using the bricks. And we wanted, again, in this case, the interior of the house to be warm. And I said, it's possible to use the bricks, and we had quite a fair bit of concrete in the house as well. We said that it's possible to use these materials and still have a warm atmosphere inside the house. And thankfully they agreed, and we went with it. And again, thankfully it came out the way it was expected to be.
Right. Nowadays, when you do this kind of design planning, is there like a wide variation? I mean, like the main theme will be modern, right? Everybody's looking at modern. How about like materials usage? Are there still a lot of people using glass, or it has shifted to more concrete, smaller windows, or is actually a mixture and it is really depending on preferences? Like, what are you seeing on the ground?
I think it generally will depend on the preferences. In the office, I like to think about the kind of architecture that we do, and I like to use this term called warm modernism. So it's the idea of that the modern house, but with the use of the materials to actually give it a warmth and give it a kind of a feel atmosphere, again slightly different from a clean modernist look that we normally associate it with. So you see that houses with a lot of wood on the ceiling, with concrete, with steel, with bricks. Even with these materials and even with the use of like steel and aluminum, the house can still feel comfortable when you're inside the space. And again, because of the materials, when you move through the house, the kind of lighting and the kind of even soundproofing of the house is slightly different with these materials. So generally, I think what it means is that when you're inside the space, you should feel comfortable and kind of cozy inside.
Right. So warm modernism is usually like your style.
That's the term. I think I heard it a few times, and I think would probably be the easiest way to describe it without having to like talk about it profoundly about really what the style is and all that.
So do in the architectural world for landed homes, do different architects have different style? Like how does it work? Or usually like it's very fluid depending on the preferences?
I think there's always a certain level of fluidity in most architects' work. I think also as you get more established or as you get older, you try to find something that kind of describes your work or your sense of what architecture should be. For instance, again, warmth architecture doesn't mean that I can't have a house with white walls. It's still possible, right? I mean, if I have it with a timber ceiling and I have a timber floor, even though the walls are white and the furnitures are white, there can still be a certain level of warmth inside the architecture. So that fluidity comes from it's possible to have such ideas of the design, but still be able to cater to what the client's imagined sense of the space would be.
I was reading like a couple of books about how our money and economics has evolved over time. There was this very interesting observation that there was this like pivotal moment where in the past we were under this standard called a gold standard. And there's this very distinct observation that a lot of the construction architecture in the past, because of a lack of inflation, unlike today, whereby we are always constantly fighting rising costs and inflation and speed and everything. A lot of the buildings, for example, like the olden day shop houses in the colonial era, they are very solid. Like the walls are extremely thick and they last like hundreds of years. I mean, like compared to a lot of the buildings nowadays, like maybe after 10 years, you start to see a lot of cracks and and all that. Like, how do you feel about the evolvement of this? Like, and like, also like in terms of how lasting usually are materials nowadays?
Well, interestingly, I stay in Tiong Bahru in the pre-war house. And I was just
super thick
speaking
wall
to somebody just now that the house has been around for 60 years and
still solid.
It's still solid. My floor is the original concrete floor.
So you stay in the walkout apartment?
Yes, that's right. The pre-war walkout.
Houses,
and it's the original flooring because it has not been touched. So we kept the original concrete floor. Concrete floor. So, and there's hardly any cracks on the concrete after 60 years. So I think I have to agree that, it was very well made, or at least the British made it really well back then. These days, I think in terms of workmanship and quality of the work, I don't think it's a case of us not being as well in terms of the construction technique or not using as good the materials as before. But we are more efficient. So in the past, in the case of a pre-war house, the architect or the engineer, then a British, would say, let's cast a floor 150, 200 millimeters thick and let's just do it. But you don't need a floor that is this thick these days. You say that a floor only needs to be about 150 millimeters and that's sufficient. Would you cast a thicker floor? Not necessary unless a client says, I want the floor to last for 50, 100 years. But 150 millimeter thick floor will last you 50, 60 years. I think most of modern architecture has lasted for that long. So we no longer have to do it really thick. We are more efficient now, I think. So we know precisely that this is the thickness that we do. And the same for walls. We know that precisely that double brick is sufficient. And so we do double bricks for the exterior walls. But that said, there are still buildings or houses that are built with single bricks. Maybe it's a cost issue. It could be a case resultant of a design and build contract. So a client, an owner asks a builder to build it for X amount of money. And so they have no choice. They can only afford a single layer. But I think in comparison, I think what we do now, we are smarter and more efficient about it. But we know exactly when we use this thickness or this wall thickness, what can be achieved and how long it can last. Right? Whereas in the past, I think there's a lot of guessing in it. And they say guessing, well, maybe this. So maybe
let's do it really overly.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe if you go to another block in Tiong Bahru, maybe the floors are thinner because maybe the British were just testing out around the whole estate to see what actually works. So we don't really know for sure. But I think there's a lot more precision in what we do now. The same for the materials that we use on buildings. I think there's a lot more science and a lot more experimentation that goes in it. And so when we use a material, in the past, we would say we want something that looks like wood, and wood is the only choice. And if you were to use wood in Singapore's context, say 20 years ago, they will only suggest using local woods, right? Whether it's a Chengai or a Balau wood, which is a local or Malayan wood. These days, we have broader knowledge. We also know, say, warpage of wood over time and how much water it absorbs. We know certain species of wood would have a certain tendency to warp or crack or attract termites or not, right? There's a lot more science that goes in now to building than before. And then on top of that, we have a lot of other choice which are synthetic. We have tiles that look like wood. We have composite wood, which looks like wood, are made from wood, but they are not real wood. And we also have what we call high pressure laminates and etc. and so on. So there's so much choice. And with each choice, I think there's a whole lot of data as well for us to go through, even as architects, that this wood at this thickness, what it does, what it means, how long it can last. So I think if done properly, an architect would be able to build something that would be more precise and more accurate and would last as well as what they have done in the past. But it requires a lot of knowledge seeking, obviously. I mean, we speak to suppliers, we have all these samples in our office. Half the office space is full of materials for us to see what it does. Sometimes we put the materials outdoors to see how it weathers over time and so on.
So, in the modern day era, I mean, of course, with rising costs, the current weather, which is like increasing in heat and everything, what is a fair period that a landed home can last? Like if it's built today, if it's in terms of precision for materials and having a good architect and builder, what is a fair number of years?
I don't think there is a benchmark to it, but
in your context, what do you think is fair?
I mean, we have seen modern buildings lasting 50, 60, 100 years. They still are okay condition in terms of the structure and all that. I think in the context of a residential landed house, when we design something as an architect, we expect it to last as long as you can. I mean, longer than one generation of the family at least. You will need to make some changes. You may need to upgrade, for instance, the mechanical aspect of it, upgrade to the latest cables. You may need to upgrade your air conditioned over time. You may need to change some materials over time. But I think structurally, the houses are meant to last without an issue for 50, 60, 70 years.
When it comes to like lasting capabilities and also like the concept of like whether should somebody A&A, rebuild, reconstruct, Like usually what are your advice? Like, I mean, like on the ground, sometimes when we talk to builders, architects, sometimes when somebody are contemplating between like a total rebuild or doing an A&A, but after they did the A&A, maybe once it's completed, you realize that actually the costing is very much closer to doing a rebuild. Like, what are your usual advice when it comes to this kind of dilemmas?
I think one of the first questions that we ask is, how much do you need the house to be? How big do you need the house to be? A&A obviously has a restriction of 50%. So you can, if your house is 100 square meters, you can A&A up to 150 square meters. So the area is limited under URA's planning requirements. URA also requires that a certain amount of the facade or elevation is retained. So you can only change 50% of the external facade. So if you are looking to work within those constraints and you can accept those, that your area is limited to 50% of the existing and the facade is only 50% change, then you can consider the A&A. If you plan it to be a much bigger house and to plan it to add additional floor, once you go with additional floor, I would think that you would at least be looking at the reconstruction. Reconstruction is a term that we use for anything between the A&A and the new build. A&A will not allow you to build an additional floor most of the time. But as you said, in terms of the cost, they are very close these days. Because of COVID, everything has gone up. And so you will realize that between the A&A and the new build, the difference in cost may be as little as 15-20%. So then you ask yourself, for that 20%, are you happy to live with that constraints, as well as whatever existing issues the house they may have that you can see, and as well as issues that the house may have that you can't see. So maybe the house has a water seepage underground, but you can't really tell until you completely demolish the floor slab and you see watermarks and all that. These are some of the considerations, I think, that the homeowner would have to make and think through before they decide which of the A&A or new erection they want to go for.
So with A&A and new erection having a disparity of about 20% in costing, and of course, so new build A&A, right in the middle is reconstruction, which is like a term for maintaining the existing columns and all that. Like, how about recon and new build? What is the disparity in terms of pricing? Is it even much?
I think once you do a recon, the pricing would generally be between the A&A and the new build. So in the past, there are reconstruction where, most of the house is demolished, save for maybe 20% of the structure. So then the cost would then be closer to a new erection. So I think reconstruction would be somewhere in between.
About probably 5-10%.
Yes, that's
then
right.
Might as well do a full new build.
I mean, yes. I mean, if financially that's something that they can go for, yes. I think the thing is that we always think that, tell the client, look, if you look at the existing house and it's something that's done 20, 30 years ago, the same thing. I mean, unless it's built by the British, the quality of the construction is probably not going to be very good and very durable. You have to accept that to say that, okay, I'm going to do an A&A, because, I mean, this is where there are kind of semi-horror stories where we do an A&A and we took away the floor material and we realized that there is no floor slab for a house. And then the client and the builder and me, we were just looking at each other and we said, well, now we have to cast a whole new floor slab. And then once you do that, then the construction cost it goes up again. So there are a lot of hidden surprises with an A&A. And I also would say that in terms of for consultants, doing an A&A is not generally easier than a new build, because there's existing structures. There are surprises that we are not sure. So in terms of consultancy fee for the engineers and the architects, you will realize that there's no difference in doing an A&A or new build for the consultancy part of the cost.
In terms of trends, like in summation, do you see a lot more people doing rebuild, full total new build nowadays, like because of this?
Yes, I think so. I think because of the cost, is the cost of buying the land, that most homeowners would go in wanting to maximize the potential or buildability of the land that they purchased. And so they will consider to tear down and rebuild and again maximize the amount that they can build these days. I think in the last 3 years, there's more tendency for us to look at that in terms of rebuilding rather than doing an A&A.
Right. Let's chat a little bit about the demographics of landed buyers nowadays. Like, what are you seeing on the ground? Like, are there more and more younger people? Like, has there been more landed buyers than the past? Like, what are you seeing on the ground?
If I'm not wrong, I read that somewhere in February, the number of buyers for landed has increased for the age group between 30s to 40s. And that's a huge increase compared to the other age group. So I think, yes, there are possibly at least for the smaller houses, the age group of buying smaller houses are between age 30s to 40s now, or even younger than that. The older clients would be looking to either look at bigger houses, or they may consider downsizing or some other options.
And like, how about your personal practice? Like, are you seeing more and more younger people coming to your firm, or like compared to the past where perhaps landed buyers are usually more popular with the higher age bandwidth? Like, how has the trend changed compared to when you started like 15, 20 years back?
Yeah, definitely. I think now we get a lot more clients who are 30s to 40s as well. But I can't say whether it's because of the trend or it's because we are still young architects, so we tend to attract younger clients as well. So I can't say whether there is a trend because of that or whether just because we are younger architects. So maybe the older architects would have still command larger percentage of older clienteles. But at least for our office, most of our clients, I would say 60 to 70% of our clients are in that age group.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the memorable projects that you have done. Like, what are the top 3 projects that you still remember until today, that it was like challenging and exciting and like you felt that it was special?
Okay. Generally, we can remember all the projects that we have done. I mean, for architecture, it's really difficult not to remember any of the projects.
Because everything is by scratch.
Yeah, and you remember the bad ones more than the good ones because you keep telling yourself, well, let's try not to make the same mistake or go down this route again.
Define bad ones. Like, what do you mean by?
I mean, like, projects that maybe you don't control it as well. It doesn't turn out the way that you want. Project that because of maybe
some hiccups in there.
Maybe the clients selected a builder that was not great, and then it became more trouble more than anything else. So the bad ones, I think, lingers more in the memory than the good ones. Hopefully there are more good ones than the bad ones. But the one project that I will always try to keep in mind would probably be one of the first projects that we took on, which is a conservation shop house in Joo Chiat. That was one of my first project.
You started BHATCH.
When I started BHATCH Architects. Interestingly, the client was recommended by somebody that I taught in NUS at that time. At that time, because I just started the practice, so I was teaching in NUS, running a design studio in NUS while I was practicing. And one of my students recommended this client. Yes.
Right. It's like a part-time.
Yes, part-time.
Adjunct
at the school.
Okay.
So one of the students actually recommended the client to me. So that was interesting already. And when we were doing the project, and this client was young and the budget was very limited, and we wanted to rebuild an old shop house and do an extension at the rear for 600,000. And this was like, 15 years ago. Yeah.
And it's doable, 600,000.
it wasn't doable, I guess,
It was
even at that
already
time.
very limited.
But as a young architect, you said, well, you know, let's try, right? I mean, we try, right? And see what we can do. So we were working on the project, and when they were doing the facade for the house at the rear, we kind of ran out of money, right? There was no money left, and we don't know what to do for the facade. And like I said, I was teaching in NUS, and we just finished a design studio where we had to use bamboos in the studio. And so after the students were done with the bamboos, all these bamboos were thrown away outside the School of Design in NUS. And I received an email one day that the school sent out and said, we have all this bamboo. Can anybody tell us or suggest what we can do with this bamboo? I looked at it. I went to the school, later in the week, looked at it and then I told the students and the school, I'll buy the bamboo for $150. And so I got the contractor to pay. Well, I paid for the $150. I got the contractor to go down and pick up the bamboo. We brought the bamboo back to the shop house, and we started to use the bamboo to do the facade for the house at the rear. And what we did was that we had this cement concrete on the rear, and before it set in, we used the bamboo and we carved the shape of the bamboo, imprint the shape of the bamboo on the facade of the shop house at the rear. And that was the facade, that was the design. And that was the first project that I worked on. And it's particularly, significant because, again, that's something that was what I wanted to do when I left my previous office, which is that we can do something interesting by being innovative about the process without spending a large sum of money, right? There was an opportunity for us to do something beautiful and creative through, again, reusing an old material and through the craftsmanship of the builders, workers. And we finished the project. And
is the project still there?
Yes, the project is still there.
So if we go, we can still see the facade imprinted with the bamboo.
Yes, that's
shape.
right. Yes.
So the actual bamboo is not there. It's just that you will mold it in.
Yes, we mold it.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Wow.
So that's always something that I use to remind myself again and again that, it's even if we have limited resources, I think it's always possible for us, and it's up to us as designers to say, we can do something, right? And this is where we can be creative about something, and it makes it much more worthwhile at the end of the project to see that you can actually pursue a design without having to spend a lot of money.
Awesome. And maybe talk about like a very, very recent project. What was the recent one that you have just completed? Recently
completed maybe 3 houses. So we have inter-terrace house somewhere in the Kembangan area. We've also completed the bungalow. This is at Changi at Toh Crescent. Another one is we've completed a couple more. We have completed one more semi-D at Perry Avenue, which is near to this Blocks Home, Kovan area. And lastly, we have another semi-detached that is completed somewhere in the Siglap area.
Do you work with developers or mostly like your clients are like retail buyers? Like
most of these projects are retail private homeowners.
Right.
We do work with private developers, but I think private homeowners maybe make up
majority.
About 90% of our work.
Right. And like what is the plan for your firm? Like moving on, like now you have run it for about 15 years already. What plans do you have?
Well, we plan to continue to do good design and hopefully that, we continue to be able to create architecture and spaces that are meaningful. So pretty much everything that we are doing at the moment, we hope that we continue to improve. And as we improve, we may take on bigger projects. But like I said at the start, I think what we really want to do is to be able to continue to do small projects together with the large projects. Having that mix makes it more interesting for us and keeps us on our feet in terms of finding solutions for smaller, limited projects versus larger projects, which has better budgets. But we look at more innovation in terms of newer materials or newer way of doing things and so on.
Right, right. Are you like, will you be concerned with like, maybe because like you always will have to handle constrained budgets, like, or do you find it challenging?
I think I find it challenging first and foremost. More
But
than
if it cannot be
else.
done, you will say it cannot be done.
Yeah, if somebody were to ask me to build something for 600,000 now, I wouldn't be able to do it, unfortunately.
Right.
I think, yes, I mean, as architects, we still have to be
Realistic.
besides the artistic part of the work, we have to be realistic and pragmatic, and say that, well, this is not something doable. I mean, we are not, like, for instance, builders can come and say, I can do it, right? And they can do it because they can use a cheaper substitute in terms of materials. Like I said, they can use a single brick wall for the construction. But as architects, we have to kind of maintain the integrity of the construction and the work. We kind of need to make sure that it works, right? And that the house can last and it can endure 20, 30, 40 years of its lifetime. So we can't say, let's do it and then try to shortchange a process or shortchange a specification for the work that we do. I think as architects, that's the part of the kind of responsibility we have to our client as well as to society as a whole. Which is why we can't promise something that we wouldn't be able to do or is totally out of the question.
Is it stressful being an architect? Because it's like your responsibility is, once you sign, it's lifetime, right? It's like...
It is lifetime, but I think there is a limitation to it, thankfully. I think under the law, the Limitation Act, maybe 16 years, 17 years is the stretch of an architect getting sued. Is it stressful? Yes, but I would think that every line of work is stressful. I don't think it's a lot more stressful than, say, a doctor or lawyer. I don't think it's any more stressful than your line of work, for instance. We do a lot of different things. We do wear a lot of different hats as architects. But I think, again, one of the things as you grow older, you learn to manage these things. You learn to look at the positive side. And I think the positive side of the whole profession is that, you know, when somebody believes in you as an architect at the design stage, and you go through that whole process with the client and you finish building the house, and over the years after they move in, you continue to keep in touch with them, have a meal with them, you get invited back to the house, they still talk to you about the house that they are living in, that you have built for them. I think it makes it life affirming. I think it makes it such that all the difficulties or stress that you have, you know, kind of undertaken while going through the process, it makes it worthwhile, I think.
The satisfaction is like, sometimes you can't really buy it with money.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. There's so much like sweat and tears in every
exactly,
project.
Right? Even though the sweat comes from the builders, but yeah, there's a lot more, I think.
Brain work is like...
Yeah, a lot more, especially if you do the work in a thoughtful way. And sometimes in the process, the clients may not see the thinking behind why it was done. But after living in the house for a year, for 5 years, they may then realize that there's a reason why the architect did it this way, and it actually works. And again, it kind of reinforces. And when the client comes back and tells you that I didn't realize that this thing was for this purpose, and then it makes it again such that all the thoughtfulness that you put in becomes something that a user actually experience.
How much time do you spend at work? Like
how much time?
I mean, like bring us through an architect schedule. Like, do you spend a lot of time on weekends? Because, like, for example, for our line of work, our consultants, realtors, most of their schedules are flip-flop, like nighttime, weekends, because that's the time that the clients are available.
Yes.
Yeah. How much time, like?
I think it's a lot more manageable now. When I first started working in my previous office, for the first 2 years, I think I go back at about 11 to 2 a.m.
Because you meet clients at night.
No, because I'm doing work. Because you're doing
you
work,
have to draw,
I have to draw and all that.
Right.
Yeah, the clients, maybe you have clients meeting in the evenings, right? And it may end till like 9+, and then you go back to the office and you start drawing, making the revision. So I think 20 years ago, yes, I think the time that we spent was unmanageable. All right, it's hard to kind of continue living with that kind of lifestyle. It's a lot more manageable now again because I'm mid-40s, so a lot more experience, and you know exactly what needs to be done. You know exactly how you want to do it. So there's again a lot more of that precision that we talk about. That means that I no longer have to work till midnight and all that, or burn the midnight oil. Weekends I still talk to clients, but mostly on Saturdays. Well, I have a family now, so it's different. When I first started out, and even when I first started my practice, I had no family. So that's okay. I can work on Saturdays and Sundays. I'm happy to meet clients. But I think now a lot more balance. And also the same thing, I kind of, expect my architects to have that work-life balance. So I tell my architects, there's no need to reply to a client on weekends, and outside of office hours, we have the right to disconnect. And so you don't have to answer the client's text until the next day. So clients are busy. So they may text us like after working hours, or they may text us on weekends. But we'll get back to them unless it's an emergency. But otherwise, we'll get back to them during the working hours. So I think we manage that part much better. And also clients understand that a lot more, because I think most of them has the same kind of balance in their own respective work.
I think that's great. Yeah.
I know. I kind of sympathize.
I mean, like you setting like probably like a Sunday, really like a sabah for your team. I think that's great. I mean, it allows like longevity as well. For your entire team. Yeah, and I mean, for us, we run two teams. I mean, our consultants are in the realty team. Our media guys are in the media team. The media team will have like a more structured in terms of like working hours and stuff. But of course, like sometimes we have weekend shoots and events and stuff like that. Yeah, but I think overall, like running a business as a founder, you also have to take care of your guys, your people.
Yeah, and also I think if you are tired, if you are moody, I don't think that makes you very good architects. I think if you are not living a healthy lifestyle, then it's very difficult to convince clients that building a house, planning it in a certain way is going to be good for their well-being. Right? Because a lot of the work is, especially for private house, is about the well-being of the users. But if the architect can't take care of his own health, then there's very little we can say to convince clients that well-being is important when planning a space.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Usually before we end our interviews, we will invite our guests to select a few questions.
Okay.
So this is a deck that has been crafted by our team. It's called Condour Cards.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a set of 100 questions. Each teammate contributed one question.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can pick one based on just randomize lah.
Sure.
Okay. Come, you can read out the question.
I have to read it out?
Yeah.
Okay. What is one thing you didn't know about your current career when you first started? I think I've mentioned that previously. When you're in architecture school, your work revolves around design and just design, right? We stay up late just to work on our designs. We even skip tutorials to continue working on the design projects that we're working on. So all the focus is on design and how to make something look great, and on how to make something work and make sense to the people, right? To the tutors, to the school. But when you work as an architect, design is only 20% of the work that you do. The other 80% is you spend on talking to clients, talking to government agencies, talking to contractors, trying to manage them, trying to administer the contract in between the different parties. So that 80% that they don't cover in school, you only pick it up when you actually work. You don't go through you do go through a little bit of that in school, but nobody really pays too much attention to those things. But those things ended up being the most important and the bulk of the work that you do. And that's intimidating, I think, when you first start out as architect. But I suppose as I grow older, I think that kind of makes sense as well. I think if you spend too much time on design, you can end up in that endless loop of just, drawing and changing and trying to do something for the betterment of the design. But that process is infinite and it's not healthy, I suppose, if you don't have the other parts of work to occupy your mind. And again, I think that's what differentiates us from, say, artists. We have all these other things to occupy our mind, and I think it's a kind of balance that way. As architects, we kind of learn a lot more. I learn from the consultants, I learn from the clients and all that. So they give a balanced view of what design should be, what design can do. And I think all these things ends up making us better architects than if we just focus just purely on design.
And very much is this entire chain is really about the humans living in the home. There's a lot of human understanding, empathy, interaction, their preferences, their lifestyle, and based on what I'm hearing is that sometimes if it's just on design, we might forget that we're actually doing it for the humans that
exactly
are hiring us to do it for their family, right? So,
and it's the humans that makes the whole thing satisfactory, right? That makes it satisfying and makes it great. And when you look back at it, it's the humans that would be happy using the spaces that you created. And I think that's more beautiful than creating and designing a beautiful building, but nobody using that building.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I think it's been wonderful that our audiences can hear from a practicing architect and also the work that you do. Thank you very much for coming on NOTG.
Thanks for having me.
I think it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Melvin. So this thing is that you can eat. No, we're not going to eat it. I'm just wondering what's going to happen to the thing and all that.
Okay.